Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. When the first wave of German immigrants came to Missouri in the early 19th century, our state was a very different place from what we know now. Their arrival changed their new home in ways we see, feel, and taste throughout Missouri today. In 2019, a book titled Explore Missouri's German Heritage laid out the who, what, and where of German cultural heritage in the state. It also inspired a documentary film, which had a screening in February in Washington, Missouri. And it was in February that I talked with the author of that book, W. Arthur Mehrhoff. He is also a retired academic coordinator for the Museum of Art and Archaeology at the University of Missouri. Now, let's begin with the first wave of German immigrants who came to Missouri in the mid-1830s. With their arrival, and within just a few years, I understand that the German population in St. Louis increased exponentially. Arthur, why did they leave Germany, and how did they end up settling in Missouri?
Immigration historians talk about push-pull factors that people in what we now call Germany, but at that particular time, the early 19th century, were a collection of duchies, municipalities, sometimes free cities, and they were being pushed out by rapid industrialization. A fellow named Karl Marx from Germany wrote about that extensively. And also there were pull factors. There were the opportunities available to emigrate to what they considered a new land, and there was also a lot of I would call viral newsmaking about what's available in the far west, as Missouri was called. So those push-pull factors together created a powerful dynamic feeding the immigration of these German city-states.
And can you talk about who was responsible for that viral moment in the 1830s?
Well, that's kind of an anachronism, I guess, but there was a wonderful series of letters by a German jurist lawyer, if you will, Gottfried Duden, who, like Alexis de Tocqueville in France, came to study this new world, this American Republic, and trying to understand the future, if you will. And so Duden lived in sort of the western edge of the St. Louis metropolitan area today, and actually hired out a lot of the farm work to a German farmer. And so many people feel that kind of colored his view that if you're not doing all the heavy lifting, then it might look better than it really was. But his letters, which were well written and very congenial, if you will, attracted a very receptive audience who wanted to believe in the possibility of a new Germany, or some of the revolutionary ideals of Germany that were coming forward at that time. And here might be a place to give them place. Mm-hmm. And so I think that helps to explain the desire to believe is sometimes stronger than the facts themselves.
Sure. Now, Duden, you said, hired German immigrants to take care of his land. So as far as the way St. Louis looked at that time, how did it look? And what about rural Missouri?
That's an important point, I think, and one that we really explored a lot in Missouri Humanities German Heritage Initiative. It's important to remember that many of what we call the German communities outside of St. Louis were extremely rural and remained extremely rural really until after the Second World War. So relative isolation there, I think, helped them keep their, whether it's from Westphalia or Swiss or it's a town called Vienne, like Vienna, Swiss, etc., Westphalia. So these little communities, or these little provinces, if you will, were able to kind of recreate village life very often outside of the metropolitan or St. Louis area, the urban area. The urban area certainly reflects a lot of German influence, but there were also a lot of factors, if you will, rubbing against that and making it difficult to sort of maintain one's strict cultural identity.
Mm-hmm. And how was it that German immigrants were received by those who were living in Missouri at that time?
Just as the character of these immigrants and these immigrant settlements varied widely based upon their places of origin, they also varied widely across Missouri. Many examples, certainly, of people getting along famously, but as we'll see, especially later, that the strong anti-slavery settlement characteristic of most German immigrants certainly came to play in a slave state like Missouri.
Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting point I'd like you to talk about a little bit more. The times when Germans did arrive sort of in large numbers, and what was going on geopolitically certainly, seems to have had an effect. Now, when German immigrants did arrive here in Missouri, when it was operating as a slave state, what influence, if any, did German immigrants have at that time and during the Civil War?
German love for what they called Freiheit, or freedom, was very, very strong. I mean, it was sort of an animating, almost a revolutionary force. In some ways, historians look at the revolutionary spirit of the American independence movement as taking root in Europe, and especially in Germany. There were failed, you can call them revolutionary efforts or reform efforts. A major one in 1848, but back in the 1830s as well. So Germany began consolidating. Power began consolidating. Industrialization was taking place, and so a lot of people who lived in what's now called Germany thought it might be better to start over and to kind of recreate their traditional ways of life in the New World, in the far west of Missouri. So they brought that powerful sense of independence, revolutionary spirit, and certainly many of them played large roles in the upcoming conflict, the war between the states, or Civil War. Mm-hmm. And a lot of abolitionist newspapers were written in German. Professor Steve Rowan of the University of Missouri, St. Louis, has written extensively and excellently about that time period. People would like to learn more and in depth about the courage it took to publish an abolitionist newspaper in Missouri at that time.
And is that part of history something that is not very well known among people here in the state?
Well, probably more so here than elsewhere, but one of the essays in Explore Missouri's German Heritage is called The Incident at Camp Jackson. And the idea is that some of the big events of Missouri in the Civil War lie just underfoot, but buried in memory, or perhaps in lack of memory, underneath layers and layers of subsequent development. So there's a lot that's just beneath our feet if we would care to look. And so yeah, I think it's incumbent upon us to explore our heritage and get a better sense of where we came from.
Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of what does remain and what is visible, how did German immigrants over time change the land or the landscape of Missouri and St. Louis?
I believe that, and I use the term German advisedly, but for lack of a better organizing principle, they shaped the land in important ways. The German concept of Landschaft, or shaping the land, was very important, and you'll see it in places like the old Munichburg neighborhood in Jefferson City, which started out as a separate German settlement, eventually was absorbed. In old Munichburg, they would have alley houses. The houses were built in such a way to reinforce community, and today we think of big lawns, etc. But that was not the style. Trying to reinforce community in Hermann, Missouri, especially, was shaped to create this. Well, basically, at New Philadelphia, a lot of people were coming from, the early German settlements from Philadelphia, but you'll see it in little towns like Westphalia, Missouri, which is like a picture postcard for a lot of people of a traditional German village. So you can still see it in the landscape, and if one's willing to look, it shows up in a place like St. Louis's own Missouri Botanical Garden. There's a statue there of Dr. Georg Engelmann, or George Engelmann, whose efforts helped Henry Shaw establish not just a pleasure garden like Tower Grove Park, but a world-class botanical garden, research center, and his influence is still powerful today.
We're talking today with W. Arthur Mehrhoff, retired academic coordinator for the Museum of Art and Archaeology at the University of Missouri and author of Explore Missouri's German Heritage. Arthur, one of the other things that we had noted at the top had to do with the way German immigrants changed the way that we eat. So what is it that has come to us and that remains of German immigrant influence on the cuisine of Missouri?
We tend to think of German cuisine as starchy sausage, meat, potatoes, etc., and a glass of beer. Well, the beer definitely factors in, but we sometimes forget that Germany today is incredibly diverse in its geography, and it's as big as Montana, and so there are all sorts of different recipes. I mean, there's a wonderful cookbook, the German cookbook by New York Times former food writer Mimi Sheraton, and if you want a really big cookbook, that would be the one to explore. German heritage. But the best place, I think, to really get at foodways, besides the various festivals and church dinners that take place throughout the area, is at Deutsheim State Historic Site to look at the restored archaeological site of a Gemüsegarten, a kitchen garden that was, if you will, dug up from the ruins, discovered and recreated, restored, and is now a very active display, very much a living museum display that depicts the kinds of foods that they grew. And one thing I guess it's fair to say is that in the climate in Germany made it imperative to put up, as my grandmother might say, food for the winter. And so you'll get a lot of pickling and vinegars and things like that. And also I think, besides the beer and the wine, which this is a country that still operates, makes beer based on beer laws, purity laws that go back to the early part of the 16th century. So there's a long-standing tradition there.
Right. So when we raise a glass, that is something that we are enjoying part of.
You're part of a tradition there.
Mm-hmm. No, I understand that your family comes from German heritage. As you were researching, Arthur, the history of German settlers in Missouri, did that place your own family's history in a new light? And if so, in what way?
In fact, I used that phrase, more light. I borrowed it from the dying Johann Goethe, who supposedly said on his deathbed, more light, this symbol of the Enlightenment. He could have simply meant, please draw the curtains, but it's really become a symbol for trying to illuminate our heritage, to find our connections. Germans talk about Bildung, B-I-L-D-U-N-G, and that's life formation. It's more than just education. It's how you become the person you are through your experiences, certainly upon reflection. And what I think working on this publication did for me was it shed much more light on all the many little things that I took for granted for so long, and now see, it's rich. I mean, sometimes it can be almost overwhelming. And I use the image or a metaphor of ice vine. It's a late harvest German wine. It's kind of risky in a sense that, if you don't get it right, then you can lose your grapes. But after these frosts, the grapes are picked and they're very concentrated, it has just an incredible essence to it. And I try to think of these artifacts now as an ice vine, as saved from, if not frost, a lot of things have been lost over the years. And so trying to capture that essence and bottle it so that other people can hold the glass up to the light and savor them with you. And I think that's the best way to think about one's own heritage. E pluribus unum. Sometimes we lost the pluribus, and how to keep that balance, which is the challenge for every good vintner, every winemaker, keeping the balance, not too sweet, not too bitter. That's really, I think, how we try to explore Missouri's German heritage. I call myself the Arthur of the publication rather than the author, because it was such a collaborative effort with many people, very different than other books that I've written. So I really want to give credit where credit is due. And it's not the last word on Missouri's German heritage. It's a prologue. It's like the old guidebooks of Bedecker, and hopefully get people to geh und Vorstell, to go out and explore and do their own interpretations.
Arthur, thank you so much for joining us today.
Elaine, thank you. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be here.
W. Arthur Mehrhoff is the author, along with a community of people, of the 2019 book titled Explore Missouri's German Heritage. The book lays out the who, what, and where of German cultural heritage in Missouri, and it inspired a documentary film which was screened in Washington, Missouri this past February, which is also when I spoke with him. Mehrhoff is also a retired academic coordinator for the Museum of Art and Archaeology at the University of Missouri.
This episode was produced and engineered by Emily Woodbury, with podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer. St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
St. Louis on the Air proudly supports local artists by using music from Life Creative Group.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.